viewers, and welcome to another chapter of reading. We are joined by my lovely Lily. One more character. Yes, you are. Okay. She was getting feisty, so I had to let her go. But anyway, we are temporarily joined by her. Anyhow, today is another chapter of reading. So, without further ado, let's get started, shall we? Chapter 5, The Order of the Phoenix. My dear old mom, yeah, said Sirius. We've been trying to get it down for a month, but we think she put a permanent sticking charm on the back of the canvas. That permanent sticking charm sounds like it would come in handy. Especially when you're trying not to remove or get rid of something. Do you think it works on people? Something to ponder about, I guess. I'm just wondering because I have a person I would like to be stuck to. Moving on. Let's get downstairs quick, before they all wake up again. But what's a portrait of your mother doing here? Harry asked, bewildered, as they went through the door from the hall and led the way down a flight of narrow stone steps, the others just behind them. Hasn't anyone told you this was my parents' house? Said Sirius. But I'm the last black left, so it's mine now. I offered it to Dumbledore for headquarters. About the only useful thing I've been able to do. Aww. Fucking Sirius. Harry, who had expected a better welcome, noted how hard and bitter Sirius' voice sounded. He followed his godfather to the bottom of the stairs and through a door leading into the basement kitchen. It was scarcely less gloomy than the hall above. A cavernous room with rough stone walls. Most of the light was coming from a large fire at the far end of the room. A haze of pipe smoke hung in the air like battle fumes, through which loomed the menacing shapes of heavy iron pots and pans hanging from the dark ceiling. Many chairs had been crammed into the room for the meeting, and a long wooden table stood in the middle of the room, littered with rolls of parchment, goblets, empty wine bottles, and a heap of what appeared to be rags. Mr. Weasley and his eldest son, Bill, were talking quietly with their heads together at the end of the table. Mrs. Weasley cleared her throat. Her husband, a thin, balding, red-haired man who wore orange-rimmed glasses, looked around and jumped to his feet. "Harry!" Mr. Weasley said, hurrying forward to greet him and shaking his hand vigorously. Okay, I'm going to try my best here. There. I tried. Good to see you. Over his shoulder, Harry saw Bill, who still wore his long hair in a ponytail. My hair's in a ponytail. Hastily rolling up the lengths of parchment left on the table. "Doing all right, Harry?" Bill called, trying to gather up 12 scrolls at once. "Mother didn't make you come be a green one, did then?" "He tried," said Tom, striding over to help Bill and immediately sending the candle toppling onto the last piece of parchment. "No, sorry." "Oh dear," sounded Mrs. Weasley, sounding exasperated. And she repaired the parchment with a wave of her wand. In the flash of light caused by Mrs. Weasley's charm, Harry caught a glimpse of what looked like the plan of a building. Mrs. Weasley had seen him looking. She snatched the plan off the table and stuffed it into Bill's heavily wadded arms. "This sort of thing ought to be cleared away promptly at the end of meetings." she snapped before sweeping off toward an ancient dresser from which she started unloading dinner plates. Bill took out his wand, muttered "Ivascato," and the scrolls vanished. "Sit down, Harry," said Sirius. "You've met Madungus, haven't you?" The thing Harry had taken to be a pile of rags gave a fur-wand grunting snore, then drifted away. Madungus mumbled sleepily. "Our boy was Sirius." He raised a very grubby hand in the air as though gloating. His droopy, bloodshot eyes unfocused. Ginny giggled. I agree, that is a funny moment. "Meeting's over, Don," said Sirius as they all sat down around him at the table. "Harry's remark." "Huh?" said Madungus, peering balefully at Harry through his matted ginger hair. "Oh, yeah. You're right, Harry." "Yeah," said Harry. Madungus fumbled nervously in his pockets, still staring at Harry, and pulled out a grimy black pipe. He stuck it in his mouth, ignited the end of it with his wand, and took a deep pull on it. Great billowing clouds of greenish smoke obscured him in seconds. "Oh, you're an apology," grunted a voice from the middle of the smelly cloud. "For the last time, Madungus," called Mrs. Weasley, "will you please not smoke that thing in the kitchen, especially not when we're about to eat." Said Madungus. "Right. Sorry, Molly." The cloud of smoke vanished as Madungus stowed his pipe back in his pocket, but an acid smell of burning socks lingered. "Ugh. That just sounds... no. That's definitely no lavender candle." "And if you want dinner before midnight, I'll need a hand," Mrs. Weasley said to the room at work. "Now you can stay where you are, Harry, dear. You've had a long journey. What can I do, Molly?" said Tonks enthusiastically, bounding forward. Mrs. Weasley hesitated, looking apprehensive. "No, it's all right, Tonks. You have a rest, too. You've done enough today." No, I want to help," said Tonks brightly, knocking over a chair as she hurried toward the dresser from which Ginny was collecting cutlery. "Okay, I'm gonna act this out to the best of my ability, so do not judge me." Hi, Tonks. I hope you like that little interactive bit. I'm not really as clumsy as Tonks, but I wanted to bring that moment to life, so I hope you enjoyed the interactivity. Moving forward. Soon a series of heavy knives were chopping meat and vegetables of their own accord, supervised by Mr. Weasley, while Mrs. Weasley stirred a cauldron dangling over the fire, and others took out plates, more goblets, and food from the pantry. Harry was left at the table with Sirius and Madungus, who was still blinking mournfully at him. "Green old pretty sons?" he asked. "No," said Harry. "I haven't seen anyone." "Everyone has left," said Madungus, leaning forward, a pleading note in his voice. "But I had a business opportunity." Harry felt something brush against his knees and started. But it was only Crookshanks, Hermione's bandy-legged ginger cat, who wound himself around Harry's legs, purring, then jumped onto Sirius's lap and curled up. I can confirm that's what cats do sometimes. Yeah, my darling friend who you've seen earlier and possibly in future chapters, she likes to walk around me sometimes, and then after she gets She likes to get comfortable on my lap as well. She's my feisty sweetheart. And I love her no matter what mood she's in. Moving forward. Sirius scratched him absent-mindedly behind the ears as he turned, still grim-faced. Harry. I could send this over now. No, it's been lousy, said Harry. For the first time, something like a grin flitted across Sirius's face. Don't know what you're complaining about, my son. What? Said Harry incredulously. Personally, I'd have welcomed a Dementor attack. A deadly struggle for my soul would have broken the monotony nicely. I think you've had it bad. At least you've been able to turn out and power, stretch your legs, get into a few fights. When the second side from home. How come? Asked Harry, frowning. Because the Ministry of Magic's still after me. And Voldemort will know all about me being an animagus by now. Wormtail will have told him. So my big disguise is useless. There's not much I can do for the Order of Phoenix. Or so Dumbledore feels. Oh. I'm hugging Sirius. There was something about the slightly flattened tone of voice as Sirius entered Dumbledore's name that told Harry Sirius was not very happy with the headmaster anymore. Harry felt a sudden upsurge of affection for his godfather. You know what's been going on, he said bracingly. Oh, yeah, said Sirius sarcastically. Listening to Snape's reports, having to take all his side pins that he's up there risking his life while I'm sat on my backside here, having a nice, comfortable time, asking me how the cleaning's going. What cleaning? Asked Harry. Trying to make this place fit for human habitation, said Sirius, waving a hand up to his small kitchen. We've lived here for 10 years, not since my mother died. Unless you count her old house out, and he's gone round the place. Hasn't cleaned anything in ages. Sirius, said Mundungus, who did not appear to have paid any attention to this conversation, but had been minutely examining an empty goblet. The sordid silver, mate. Yes, said Sirius, surveying it with distaste. Fine 15th century goblin wrought silver, embossed with the black thumb and crest. Then come off, though, muttered Sirius, polishing it with his cuff. Fred, don't! No, just carry them! Mrs. Weasley shrieked. Very Sirius and Mundungus looked around and a split second later dived away from the table. Fred and George had bewitched a large cauldron of stew, an iron flagon of butterbeer, and a heavy wooden breadboard, complete with knife to hurtle through the air toward them. The stew skidded the length of the table and came to a halt just before the end, leaving a black burn on the wooden surface. The flagon of butterbeer fell with a crash, spilling its contents everywhere, and the bread knife slipped off the board and landed, point down and quivering ominously exactly where Sirius's right hand had been seconds before. Yeesh! That would give me a panic attack. I don't recognize. Oh yes, one of my favorite moments because I love it in the film. For heaven's sake! Screamed Mrs. Weasley. There was no need! I said enough of this! Just because you're allowed to use magic now does not mean you have to whip out your wands for every little thing! And I went with both a combination of the book because even though both are fitting, I I I don't see the point of calling everything tiny and little. So I was combining both the film and the book there. So I hope you enjoyed it. I also haven't done one of those in a while, since I've been wanting to combine Hermione and Prisoner of Azkaban with the film as well, but, well, I kind of forgot about that. So I'm making up for it by doing it in Order of the Phoenix. Quite literally. Anyway, moving on. I hope you did enjoy it, though. We were just trying to save a bit of time, said Fred, hurrying forward and wrenching the bread knife out of the table. So serious, mate. Didn't mean to. Harry and Sirius were both laughing. Mundungus, who had toppled backward off his chair, was swearing as he got to his feet. Crookshanks had given an angry hiss and shot up under the dresser, for hence his large yellow eyes glowed in the darkness. Boys. Boys, Mr. Weasley said, lifting the stew back to the middle of the table. Mother's right. You're supposed to show a sense of responsibility now that you've come of age. None of your brothers caused this sort of trouble. Mrs. Weasley raged at the twins, slamming a fresh flagon of butterbeer onto the table and spilling almost as much again. Bill didn't feel the need to operate every few feet. Bill didn't charm everything he met. Percy! She stopped dead, catching her breath with a frightened look at her husband, whose expression was suddenly wooden. Let's eat, said Bill quickly. It looks wonderful, Molly. Looks wonderful, Molly, said Lupin, ladling stew onto a plate for her and handing it across the table. For a few minutes there was silence, but for the chink of plates and cutlery, alongside the scraping of chairs as everyone settled down to their food. Then Mrs. Weasley turned to Sirius and said, I've been meaning to tell you, there's something trapped in that writing desk in the drawing room. It keeps rattling and shaking. Of course, it could just be a bogger, but I thought we ought to ask Alistair to have a look at it before we let it out. Whatever you like, said Sirius indifferently. The curtains in there are full of doxies, too, Mrs. Weasley went on. I thought we might try and tackle them tomorrow. I look forward to it, said Sirius. Harry heard the sarcasm in his voice, but he was not sure that anyone else did. Opposite Harry, Tonks was entertaining Hermione and Ginny by transforming her nose between mouthfuls, screwing her eyes up each time with the same pained expression she had worn back in Harry's bedroom. Her nose swelled to a beak-like protuberance like Snape's, shrank to something resembling a button mushroom, and then sprouted a great deal of hair from each nostril. Apparently this was a regular mealtime entertainment, because after a while Hermione and Ginny started requesting their favorite noses. Do that one like a pig snout, Tonks. Tonks obliged, and Harry, looking up, had the fleeting impression that a female Dudley was grinning at him from across the table. Oh, that's a funny image. Tonks as Dudley. At least Tonks would be a little more bearable than Dudley. Mr. Weasley, Bill, and Lupin were having an intense discussion about goblins. "They're not giving away anything yet," said Bill. "I still can't work out whether they believe this back or not. Of course, they might prefer not to take sides at all. Keep out of it." "I'm sure they'd never go over to you, Lupin," said Mr. Weasley, shaking his head. "They've suffered losses, too. Remember that goblin family who murdered last time, somewhere near Nottingham?" "I think it depends on what they're offered," said Lupin. "And I'm not talking about gold. If we're offered freedoms we've been denying them for centuries, we're going to be tempted. Have you still not had any luck with Ragnarok? No? He's feeling pretty anti-lizard at the moment, said Bill. He hasn't stopped raging about the Bagman business. He reckons the ministry did a cover-up. Those goblins never got their gold from him, you know. A gale of laughter from the middle of the table drowned the rest of Bill's words. Fred, George, Ron, and Mundungus were rolling around in their seats. And then, joked Mundungus, tears running down his face. And then, if you believe it, he says to me, here, Don, where'd you get all those toes from? Because some son of a blood just gone and nicked all mine. And I says, nicked all your toes! Well, what next? So you'll be wanting more, then. And if you believe me, lads, the boom, the scrubber, buy all his own goods back off me what twice would have paid him in the first place. I don't think we need to hear any more of your business dealings. Thank you very much, Mundungus, said Mrs. Weasley sharply, as Ron slumped forward onto the table, howling with laughter. Beg pardon, Molly, said Mundungus at once, wiping his eyes and looking at Harry. You'll have to make him a that because I don't know how to vote yet. But you know, I nicked him off that Watty Harris in the first place, so I wasn't really doing nothing wrong. I don't know where you went about right now, Mundungus, but you seem to have missed a few crucial lessons, said Mrs. Weasley coldly. Fred and George buried their faces in their goblets of butterbeer. George was hiccuping. For some reason, Mrs. Weasley threw a very nasty look at Sirius before getting to her feet and going to fetch a large crumble for pudding. Harry looked around at his godfather. Honestly, I don't know what rhubarb crumble is, but it sounds like some sort of rhubarb pie or tart or something in that variety. I kind of want to know what it tastes like now that I think about it. Moving forward, Molly doesn't approve of McDonald's, said Sirius in an undertone. He's in the Oda, Harry said very quietly. He's useful, Sirius muttered. Knows how to cook. Well, he would, seeing as he's once himself. But he's also very loyal to Dumbledore. We helped him out in the test all time. He needs to have someone like Ben around. Here's things we don't. But Molly thinks inviting him to sleep for dinner is going too far. He hasn't forgiven him for slipping off duty when he was supposed to be telling you. 3 helpings of rhubarb crumble and custard later, and the waistband on Harry's jeans was feeling uncomfortably tight, which was saying something, as the jeans had once been Dudley's. Ugh, jeans. I prefer leggings, honestly, if you can't tell. He laid down his spoon and lulled the general conversation. Mr. Weasley was leaning back in his chair, looking complete and relaxed. Hans was yawning. Okay, I really need to find a synonym. Widely, her nose now back to normal, and Jenny, who had worked crocheting out from under the dresser, was sitting cross-legged on the floor, rolling butterbeer corks for him to chase. Nearly time for bed, I think, said Mrs. Weasley on a yawn. Not just yet, Molly, said Sirius, pushing away his empty plate and turning to look at Harry. You know, I'm surprised at you. I thought the first thing you did when you got here would be to start asking questions about Voldemort. The atmosphere in the room changed with the rapidity Harry associated with the arrival of mentors. For seconds before it had been sleepily relaxed, it was now at work. even tense. A frisson had gone around the table at the mention of Voldemort's name. Lupin, who had been about to take a sip of wine, lowered his goblet slowly, looking worried. "I did," said Harry indignantly. "I asked Ron and Hermione, but they said we're not allowed in the Order, so—" "And they're quite right," said Mrs. Weasley. "You're too young." She was sitting bolt upright in her chair, her fists plunged upon its arms, every trace of drowsiness gone. "Since when did someone have to be in the Order of the Phoenix to ask questions?" "Fair point," asked Sirius. "Harry's been trapped in that Mugglehouse for a month. He's got to want to know what's been happening." "Hang on," interrupted George Brown. "How come Harry gets his question?" "Didn't answer," said Fred angrily. "We've been trying to get stuff out of you for a month, and you haven't told us a single stinking thing," said George. "You're too young, you're not in the Order," said Fred in a high-pitched voice that sounded uncannily like his mother's. "Harry's not even of age." "It's not my fault you haven't been told what the Order's doing," said Sirius calmly. "It's your parents' decision. Harry, on the other hand—" "It's not down to you to decide what's good for Harry," said Mrs. Weasley sharply. Her normally kind face looked dangerous. "You haven't forgotten what Dumbledore said, I suppose?" "Which bit?" Sirius asked finally, but with an air as though readying himself for a fight. "The bit about not telling Harry more than he needs to know," said Mrs. Weasley, placing a heavy emphasis on the last three words. Ron, Hermione, Fred, and George's hands turned from Sirius to Mrs. Weasley, as though following a tense rally. Ginny was kneeling amid a pile of abandoned butterbeer corks, watching the conversation with her mouth slightly open. Lupin's eyes were fixed on Sirius. "I don't intend to tell him more than he needs to know, Molly," said Sirius. "But he was the one who saw Voldemort come back." Again, there was a collective shudder around the table at the name. "He has more than a right. He has more to a right to know than most of—" "He's not a member of the Order of the Phoenix," said Mrs. Weasley. "He's only 15, and he's dealt with as much as most in the Order," said Sirius. "And more than some. No one's denying what he's done," said Mrs. Weasley, her voice rising, her fists trembling on the arms of her chair. "But he's not a child," said Sirius impatiently. "He's not an adult either," said Mrs. Weasley, the color rising in her cheeks. "He's not James, Sirius." I hope I put Joey Walters to justice on those dialogue pieces. "I'm perfectly clear who he is, thanks, Molly," said Sirius coldly. "I'm not sure you are," said Mrs. Weasley. "Sometimes the way you talk about him, it's as though you think you've got your best friend back." "What's wrong with that?" said Harry. "What's wrong, Harry, is that you are not your father, however much you might look like him," said Mrs. Weasley, her eyes still boring into Sirius. "You're still at school, and adults responsible for you should not forget it." "Meaning I'm an irresponsible godfather?" demanded Sirius, his voice rising. "You've been known to ask rashly here, Sirius, which is why Dumbledore keeps reminding you to stay at home and—" "We'll leave my instructions from Dumbledore out of this, if you please," said Sirius loudly. "Arthur," said Mrs. Weasley, rounding on her husband. "Arthur, back me up!" Mr. Weasley did not speak at once. He took off his glasses and cleaned them slowly on his nose, not looking at his wife. Only when he had replaced them carefully on his nose did he say, "Dumbledore knows the position has changed, Molly. He accepts that Harry will have to be filled in to a certain extent now, that he is staying at headquarters. Yes, but there's a difference between that and inviting him to ask whatever he likes. Personally, said Lupin quietly, looking away from Sirius at last, as though Mrs. Weasley turned quickly to him, hopeful that finally she was about to get an hour. I think it better that Harry gets the facts. Not all the facts, Mom, but the general picture. From us, rather than a garbled version from others. His expression was mild, but Harry felt sure that Lupin, at least, knew that some extendable ears had survived Mrs. Weasley's purge. Oh, that I wouldn't put that by Lupin. I really wouldn't. And I appreciate him being like a mediator on both sides. Said Mrs. Weasley, breathing deeply and looking around the table for support that did not come. Well, I can see I'm going to be overruled. I'll just say this. Dumbledore must have had his reasons for not wanting Harry to know too much. And speaking as someone who has got Harry's best interests at heart, he's not your son, said Sirius quietly. He's as good as, said Mrs. Weasley fiercely. Who else has he got? He's got me. Yes, said Mrs. Weasley, her lip curling. The thing is, it's been rather difficult for you to look after him while you've been locked up in Azkaban, hasn't it? Sirius started to rise from his chair. Oh no, oh no, oh no, oh no, oh no. What I don't want to. I'm trying to word this where it's not gonna give away spoilers. But advanced Potterheads, we know the significance of why this. We know what this foreshadows. We know what this foreshadows. Oh. We know what that foreshadows advanced Potterheads. Molly, you're not the only person at this table who cares about Harry, said Lupin sharply. Sirius, sit down. Mrs. Weasley's lower lip was trembling. Sirius sank slowly back into his chair, his face white. I think Harry ought to be allowed a say in this, Lupin continued. He's old enough to decide for himself. I want to know what's been going on, said Harry at once. He did not look at Mrs. Weasley. He had been touched about what she said about being as good as a son, but he was also impatient at her mollycoddling. Sirius was right. He was not a child. Very well, said Mrs. Weasley, her voice cracking. Ginny, Ron, Hermione, Fred, George, I want you out of this kitchen. No, there was an instant uproar. We're of age! Fred and George bellowed together. If Harry's allowed, why can't I? Shouted Ron. Mom, I want to! Wailed Ginny. No! Shouted Mrs. Weasley, standing upright, her eyes overbright. I absolutely forbid! Molly, you can't stop Fred and George, said Mr. Weasley wearily. They are of age, but they're still at school. But they're legally adults now, Mr. Weasley said in the same tired voice. Mrs. Weasley was now scarlet in the face. All right then, Fred and George can stay, but Ron... Harry will tell me and Hermione everything you say anyway, said Ron hotly. Oh, oh, he added uncertainly, meeting Harry's eyes. For a split second, Harry considered telling Ron that he wouldn't tell him a single word, that he would like to try a taste of being kept in the dark and see how he liked it. But the nasty impulse vanished as they looked at each other. Of course I will, Harry said. Ron and Hermione beamed. Fine, shouted Mrs. Weasley. Fine, Ginny, pet. Ginny did not go quietly. They could hear her raging and storming at her mother all the way up the stairs. And when she reached the hall, Mrs. Black's ear-splitting shrieks were added to the din. Lupin hurried off to the portrait to restore calm. It was only after he had returned, closing the kitchen door behind him, and taking his seat at the table again, that Sirius spoke. Okay, Harry, what do you want to know? Harry took a deep breath. And asked the question that had been obsessing him for a month. Where's Voldemort? What's he doing? I've been trying to watch the local news, he said, ignoring the renewed shoulders and this afternoon. And there hasn't been anything that looks like him yet. No funny deaths or anything. That's because there haven't been any suspicious deaths yet, said Sirius. Not as far as we know, anyway. And we know quite a lot. More than he thinks we do, anyway, said Lupin. How can we stop in people's lives? Harry asked. He knew that Voldemort had murdered more than once in the last year alone. Because he doesn't want to draw attention to himself at the moment, said Sirius. It would be dangerous for him. His comeback didn't come off quite the way he wanted it to, see? He messed it up. Or rather, you messed it up for him, said Lupin with a satisfied smile. How? Harry said perplexedly. You weren't supposed to survive, said Sirius. Nobody apart from his Death Eaters was supposed to know he'd come back. But you survived by witness. And the very last person he wanted to alert to his return the moment he got back was Dumbledore, said Lupin. And you made sure Dumbledore knew at once. How has that helped? Harry asked. Are you kidding? Said Bill incredulously. Dumbledore was the only one you know who was ever scared of. Thanks to you, Dumbledore was able to recall the Order of the Phoenix about an hour after Voldemort returned, said Sirius. So, what's the Order been doing? Said Harry, looking around at them all. Working as hard as we can to make sure Voldemort can't carry out his plans, said Sirius. How do you know what his plans are? Harry asked quickly. Dumbledore's got a shrewd idea, said Lupin, and Dumbledore's shrewd ideas usually turn out to be accurate. So what does Dumbledore make his plan? Well, firstly, he wants to build up his army again. Foreshadowing. Foreshadowing, said Sirius. In the old days, he had huge numbers at his command. Witches and wizards he bullied or bewitched into following him. His faithful Death Eaters, a great variety of dark creatures. You heard him planning to recruit the giants. Well, there'll just be one group he's after. He's certainly not going to try and take on the Ministry of Magic with only a dozen Death Eaters. So you're trying to stop him from getting more followers. We're doing our best, said Lupin. How? Well, the main thing is to try to convince as many people as possible that you know who really has returned, to put them on their guard, said Bill. It's proving tricky, though. Why? Because of the Ministry's attitude, said Tonks. You saw Cornelius Fudge after you know who came back, Harry. Well, he hasn't shifted his position at all. He's absolutely refusing to believe it's happened. But why? Said Harry desperately. Why is he being so stupid? It's Dumbledore. Ah, well, you put your finger on the problem, said Mr. Weasley with a wry smile. Dumbledore. Fudge is frightened of him, you see, said Tonks sadly. Frightened of Dumbledore, said Harry incredulously. Frightened of what he's up to, said Mr. Weasley. You see, Fudge thinks Dumbledore's plotted to overthrow him. He thinks Dumbledore wants to be Minister of Magic. But But Dumbledore doesn't want... Of course he doesn't, said Miss Weasley. He never wanted to take the ministry job, even though a lot of people wanted him to take it when Millicent Bagwell retired. Fudge came to power instead, but he's never quite forgotten how much popular support Dumbledore had, even though Dumbledore never applied for the job. Deep down, Fudge knew Dumbledore's much cleverer than he is, a much more powerful wizard, and in the early days of his ministry, he was forever asking Dumbledore for help and advice, said Lupin. But now it seems he's become fond of power now, and much more confident. He loves being Minister of Magic, and he's managed to convince himself that he's the clever one, and Dumbledore's simply stirring up trouble for the sake of it. How can he think that? Said Harry angrily. How can he think Dumbledore would just make it all up? That I'd make it all up? Because the Ministry accepting that Voldemort's back would mean trouble like... Because accepting that Voldemort's back would mean trouble the Ministry hasn't had to been able to cope with for nearly 14 years, said Sirius bitterly. Fudge can't bring himself to face it. So much more comfortable to convince himself Dumbledore's lying to destabilize him. I see the problem, said Lupin. While the Ministry insists there's nothing to fear from Voldemort, it's hard to convince people he's back, especially as they don't really want to believe it in the first place. What's more, the Ministry's leaning heavily on the Daily Prophet report, not to report any of what they're calling Dumbledore's rumor-mongering, so most of the wizarding community are completely unaware that anything's happened, and that makes them easy targets for the Death Eaters if they're using the Imperious Press. But you're telling people, aren't you? Said Harry, looking around at Mr. Weasley, Sirius, Bill, Mundungus, Lupin, and Tonks. You're letting people know he's back? They all smiled humorously. Well, as everyone thinks I'm a mad mass murderer and the Ministry has put up a 10-gallon price on my head, I can hardly stroll up the street and start handing out leaflets, can I? Said Sirius restlessly. And I'm not a very popular dinner guest with most of the community, said Lupin. It's an occupational hazard of being a werewolf. Tonks and Arthur would lose their jobs at the Ministry if they started shooting their mouths off, said Sirius. And it's very important for us to have spies inside the Ministry, because you can bet Voldemort will have them. We've managed to convince a lot of people, though, said Mr. Weasley. Tonks here, for one. She's too young to have been in the Order of the Phoenix last time, and having Aurors on our side is a huge advantage. Kingsley Shacklebolt's been a real asset, too. He's in charge of the hunt for Sirius, so he's been feeding Ministry information that Sirius is in Tibet. But if none of you's putting the news out that Voldemort's back, Harry began. Who said none of us was putting the news out? Said Sirius. Why do you think Dumbledore's in such trouble? What do you mean? Harry asked. They're trying to discredit him, said Lupin. Didn't you see the Daily Prophet last week? They reported that he'd been voted out of the chairmanship of the International Confederation of Wizards because he's getting old and losing his grip. But it's not true. He was voted out by Ministry Wizards after he made a speech announcing Voldemort's return. They demoted him from Chief Warlock on the Wizarding that's the wizard title. And they're talking about taking away his Order of Merlin, first class too. But Dumbledore says he doesn't care what they do as long as they don't take him off the chocolate frog cards, said Bill, grinning. It's no laughing matter, said Mr. Weasley shortly. If he carries on to find the Ministry like this, he could end up in Azkaban, and the last thing we want is Dumbledore locked up. While you know who knows Dumbledore's out there and wise to what he's up to, he's going to go cautiously for a while. If Dumbledore's out of the way, well, you know who will have a clear field. Or less foreshadowing. But if Voldemort's trying to recruit more Death Eaters, it's bound to get out that he's come back, isn't it? Said Harry desperately. Voldemort doesn't march up to people's houses and bang on their front doors, Harry, said Sirius. He tricks, jinxes, and blackmails them. He's well practiced at operating with secrecy. In any case, gathering followers is the only thing he's interested in. He's got other plans, too. Plans he can put into operation very quietly indeed. And he's concentrating on them at the moment. What's he at to apart from followers? Harry asked swiftly. He thought he saw Sirius and Lupin exchange the most fleeting of looks before Sirius said, Stuff he can only get by stealth. When Harry continued to look puzzled, Sirius said, Like a weapon. Something he didn't have last time. A nose? Sorry, it's a Harry Potter meme. If you're not familiar, go look it up. Anyhow, when he was powerful before. Yes. Like, what kind of weapon? Said Harry. Something worse than the Avada Kedavra? That's enough. Mrs. Weasley spoke from the shadows beside the door. Harry had not noticed her return from taking Ginny upstairs. Her arms were crossed and she looked furious. I want you in bed. All of you, she added, looking around at Fred, George, Ron, and Hermione. You can't boss us, Fred began. Watchmen. Sorry, Mrs. Weasley. She was trembling slightly as she looked at Sirius. You've given Harry plenty of information. Any more, and you might as well just induct him into the order straight away. Why not? Said Harry quickly. I'll join. I want to join. I want to fight. No, it was not Mrs. Weasley who spoke this time, but Lupin. The order is comprised only of average wizards, he said. Wizards who have left school, he added as Fred and George opened their mouths. There are dangers involved of which you can have no idea. Any of you, I think when we tried Sirius, we've said enough. Sirius half shrugged, but did not argue. Mrs. Weasley beckoned imperiously to her sons and Hermione. One by one, they stood up, and Harry, recognizing defeat, followed suit. And that is the end of this lengthy chapter. Join me next week for Chapter 6, The Noble and Most Ancient House of Black. I have a surprise then! It's also a sweet treat day, so I look forward to showing you. But until then, bye!